These are my worm bins, or worm farms. I use to compost my kitchen scraps. So let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they're really simple to build. I mean, you pretty much drill holes in the top and on the sides, and in fact some of them don't even have holes in the top. Make sure you have drainage holes in the bottom for sure, because you will get liquid buildup. In fact, this one doesn't have any holes, but it's got the covering, and it's loaded with worms. But they do like some ventilation for sure. And then I like to have designs on them just because it looks nicer. So I just kind of quickly took some, I think they were vegetable-based crayons or something. And there's a tree. I did this a long time ago, so it's not as prominent here. And there's a worm. Over here, there's some fruits and vegetables I had drawn on there. It's kind of washed off in the rains. But inside, basically, is I don't know how well you can see it, but that's good worm compost in there. I see some sunflower seeds sprouting out here, here, and here. And the worms are hiding right now. Let's see. I've been using this one to start a bunch of seeds. There's some worms crawling around in there. I don't know how much you can see, but there's a few worms. It's loaded. They're just underneath the surface right now. And so I'm just going to take the top of the containers off, because I'm actually going to feed these containers some. Okay, they're just all going underneath the surface right now. But that's fantastic compost. So if you are in an urban or suburban area and you don't have the ability to have chickens or other animals to provide you compost and fertility, you can have your animals being the worms here. And that's kind of the case in this suburban homestead where we're not allowed to have chickens. And if you don't have chickens, obviously you can't have goats or any other animals, ducks. So the animals I use are the worms, and I get a lot of compost. This one I've been taking from also, because I'm going to be getting rid of this bin pretty soon. But so there's a bunch of worms. Hopefully you can see that. Now they're all going under the surface again. And then lastly, this one. So what I do is I go over to this area, and let me get some of my materials here. I'm going to use a blender. It's one of the old Ninja. They still sell them actually, and it's better than using, in my opinion, getting an expensive Vitamix or anything. But you just get this probably about a $20 to $30 Ninja blender. I'm sure you can use any blender, but this works really well for me, and so that's what I recommend. And come over here to all the food scraps. So these are all vegetable scraps, and actually there's some barley that I had to get rid of, unfortunately, so I just decided to soak it and let it soften up. But I've got some broccoli in there, and just some parts from the squash that I didn't use. I had tons of squash this year, and I've been really enjoying those different squashes. The pink banana squashes and the butternut squash has been fantastic. But anyway, so typically in about a week or two, I've got these containers full of kitchen scraps and banana peels. Here's some beans that were left over. Elderberries. Anyway, there's a cabbage that I wasn't able to get to the rest of it in time. There's some rice. And I'm just gonna put it in this blender, and it'll compost faster that way. So I'll need some water to blend it up with, and we're gonna set it up here. And basically, the more you break down food items, the easier it is and more available it is to the worms to turn it over faster. The worms and the bacteria, because you're not just using the worms to get the worm castings and compost, worm compost. The bacteria play a huge role in that as well. And so you want to make these pieces as small as possible so that they break down faster, they're more easily digested. And the same thing goes with the compost pile. If you break down the pieces, the leaves, shred them up, they're going to compost faster. So I'm going to start blending all this stuff up and show you how I'm going to put it in the worm bins. So I'm going to just empty a couple of these cups, and these cups they're biodegradable, made out of corn, but I try to reuse them as many times as I can first to just kind of cut down on energy waste. And and they make a great way to keep kitchen scraps organized. And so I'm just adding things to the blender. And there's some banana peels, some apple cores, carrot shreddings, pear cores, and get that in there. There's a piece of ginger. Well, here's the ginger right here. Okay, now we're gonna, I already had some water in the container, but we need to get more. So I'll take one of these cups, grab a little water, and probably just a little bit more. All right, that's good. Now we put the top on, like so. And I've already established power, and here we go. Okay, so you don't have to have everything completely blended, but generally broken down is better. You can see kind of the consistency there, just more shredded than anything else. And I put a little more water in here than I would normally put in, and then I just take it over to my worm bin. By the way, I'm starting some seeds here, and they got a little wet from the rain, so I don't know if they're gonna make it. They may have gotten drowned. And I'm simply gonna just pour in to the worm bin, and they'll consume all of that in about a week. And in there, that's going to need a little bit more, and that's basically it. And then what I'm going to do is I'll cover those up either with a little bit more coconut coir, and that's what I use as the base in there, is coconut coir, or there's some paper in there. This one is I've got some burlap that was extra shredded from a project I was doing. Um, Here I've got soaked newspaper. That actually works really heavily soaked newspaper works great. And they'll start munching on that too if they run out of food. And then I repeat the process. So that's that. Now, then what I do is I use those all that worm casting to put in the planting hole when I'm planting my vegetable starts. So I'll just dig a little hole, drop a handful of worm castings in, and then put my plant start in, and put a little more soil, pack it up, and it's done. And so I've got worms in there, worm castings, and that's a great way for a plant to start out. It's getting nutrients and perfect soil and compost. I wanted to go over a few points on the worm bins. And one is, how much do you feed your worms? And it just depends. If you just started your worm farm or worm composting bin, vermiculture bin, then just feed them a few food scraps. Try to break them up a little bit. You don't have to blend them, but if you chop them up a little bit and put them in there and then check after, let's say, a few days or a week, you'll know if there's still food in your worm bin. Then you're going to have to not add any more than that. Once they've eaten it all, you can add a little bit more, and you can kind of get a feel as the worms are multiplying. They're going to be eating more food, and so just keep checking. And so for me, I've got a feel based on how many worms I have in each bin, how much to put in. So for me, in those worm bins, once they're mature, I put in about, I'd say maybe about 60 ounces, fluid ounces of the kitchen scraps blended in each one. And that does quite well. And so then, like I said, I finish up with putting in some either cocoa coir, and that's great bedding. It's probably the best bedding you could use for worms. And I know some commercial growers that are doing that. And it really changed how my worm bins were functioning. I started off with cardboard and torn up scratch paper and or newspaper, I mean. But when I started using the coconut coir as the base, all of a sudden everything started functioning perfectly. So that's a highly recommended tool to use is the coconut coir. And then what do you put in or what do you not put in? Well, don't put in meat scraps in general. This is in general. I think if you put in a little bit here and there of different things that are generally not recommended, it's going to be fine. But you don't want to have like all meat scraps, like don't put in 2 pounds of beef in there. They generally like vegetables. So if they like vegetables, feed them vegetables. Don't feed them something they don't want. But if there's going to be like a tiny bit that you can't separate off from your rice or whatever, don't worry about it. Put it in there, and the other organisms that are going to start to populate your worm farm are going to break it down. So you might get some black soldier fly larvae in there, and they'll gladly eat the meat. But you kind of want to stick to vegetables. They say don't use onions, and I don't use a whole lot of onions, but a little bit of onion here or there is not going to be a big deal. And so I don't freak out about it. But I generally try not to put citrus, onions, and meat you wouldn't put in there. And if you're vegetarian, then it's just, you don't have to worry about the meat part of it. In general, don't overthink it. Do a lot of experiments, and maybe in your conditions, in your environment, and in your context, it may be different. But for me, I've got a handle on what I know I can put in there. Some things that are generally not recommended, I can kind of go a little bit at, and I know how much the worms can tolerate. And then try not to saturate the worms with a lot of water. I do mix water in when I'm grinding down the compost, but I try not to put tons of water in there. So kind of the best consistency would be, I'd say, let's say maybe like a clam chowder soup or chowder soup, or like a split pea type of thing. That kind of consistency of water to food. So it should be like a thick slurry, not a watery, not like a water-based soup with vegetables in it. You want it to be thick, and then you won't overwhelm your worm bin with water. So yes, they like it moist, but they don't like it flooded. If it's flooded, you've seen worms just in the soil that when it rains, they come out and try to find dry ground. They need to have that oxygen to breathe, and if they're underwater, they're not going to get it. So so you want to keep it kind of, as often described, like a wrung out sponge, not drippy wet, but slightly moist. And then again, the uses, it's phenomenal. You've heard of it spoken of as black gold because it's really awesome compost. And like I said, I put some in each planting hole when I'm planting my seedlings, and it's dramatic how much better the seedlings are going to do when you do that. And when you put some in each hole, invariably there's going to be worm eggs. So you have those red wigglers. That's the kind of worms, the composting worms that you want to get. And so there's little worm eggs that are going to be put in the planting holes, as well as a few worms here and there. I don't really even separate out the worms at this point. I just take a handful of worm compost that's full of worms and worm eggs, and I throw them in the planting hole. And so then the worms start populating your garden beds, and that's a wonderful thing. So when you can start to see worms in your garden, you know that the soil's doing really well. I don't really do pH tests, and I don't do soil analysis. If you see rich soil with worms crawling in and out of it, you know you're on point. So don't throw away your worms. Don't throw away your kitchen scraps. They're valuable fertility for your garden.